Hi, and welcome to the Field Report Brief and Debrief for this Wednesday, April 24th, 2013. A lot of news around the separate issues of the bombing in Boston and also the explosion in Texas. We're probably not going to cover a whole lot of there because a lot of that's covered in the news. Of course, some quote-unquote argue there's some conspiracy theories, quote unquote, and false flag attacks, and also the media. So you got a variety of angles in which news is reporting the Boston bombing. Some can argue that in fact the media has kind of gone a totally odd direction with it, but just kind of the people that need to see what they need to see, we're going to see what they need to see. And we could be back and forth arguing with people among us what we saw and what they saw. Again, I think people will see what they need to see. The truth will be revealed to who it needs to be revealed to. So that just becomes one of those bipartisan arguments. I think most people have learned this from past difficulties in the past, like with major terrorist attacks and etc. Why we argue what we do, for good reason too, and that could get into a whole lot of conversation regarding past attacks, and we don't want to go down that road today, only because there's other news that has kind of overshadowed, and unfortunately, there's just been so much news around it that we're missing out on some of the other news. So we're going to cover some of the things that have been really kind of thought-provoking, interesting. And one thing that I think is probably as relevant of news is the news on Dr. Gosnell, who is up on charges of killing up to 7 babies, murder, and one woman who was receiving an abortion and died on the gurney. The story just is, the more it unravels, the worse it probably feels as bad as it did the day you heard about it, but it's probably had the whole courtroom gasping from what I understand. Shocking testimony from the medical assistant onto other employees at the abortion clinic, the House of Horrors they call it. So the testimony is continuing. We're now going into the 6th week of this trial. How the media covered it, I mean, most can say that the media didn't cover it, but you know, honestly, he's done more for the pro-life cause and more damage to the pro-choice cause, as far as damaging their reasons for why abortion somehow should be legal and justify it with all their facts. Unfortunately, he's done more to destroy the pro-choice cause, and probably one of those things that they don't even know how to go near that topic. So it just shows you it's pretty obvious. I mean, I don't see how the mainstream media can actually describe this and try to focus in on the abortion issues around it with this kind of trial and the despicable acts that this doctor created in his, well, the way he practiced his medicine. I can just tell you this, in the medicine field that I had worked in Pennsylvania myself, that a medical assistant is not trained or even closely allowed to go near anesthesia. And just that and alone could be charges for just asking the medical assistant to administer anesthesia. There is a reason why they have nurse anesthetists and professionals with a lot of education and background to do that. And just tells you how far it had to go. No reasonable medical, as far as I'm concerned, no reasonable medical personnel would ever want to go through with all this. And I don't know what he was paying these people. Maybe they're just into the business to be in the business. I don't know what goes through someone's mind working in a clinic like that, knowing all the dangers, just some of the issues around the health department. What were they thinking? So there's a lot of questionable things going on, but it's nothing different from what you see a lot nowadays, because you see a lot of the questionable behavior around clinics like this. Some mental health facilities, same thing, questionable things. I know a lot of the agencies that we dealt with always try to keep up with the standards, so that doesn't mean all these agencies and programs have these problems. It just goes to show you how far we've gone as far as the silence on the abortion clinic and what goes on inside. Is two very different things, legally and morally unethical by all medical standards. So it should be pretty interesting how that part of it in itself is handled. It's really just disturbing altogether. Okay, so that kind of covers that part of the news. Some of the other interesting news that came out recently, Argentina, in the Belfast Telegraph, they were describing the fireball that covered the nighttime sky, and I guess there was a concert going on at the time. And interestingly enough, a fireball appears in the sky, lights up the whole area, and somehow there was some who believed it was pyrotechnics, and it turns out it was a fireball. I guess when you see something like that at night, you could probably, at a concert especially, but they also showed really interesting video from other links from Argentina, and some had said from Belfast they saw it as far as that part of the region, and also in Santiago in Chile, so that's 250 miles away. So interestingly enough, this is not the first of, or the second, this is the first of many. And you notice that with all the activity in the solar mass coronal injections, that a lot more should be happening. We haven't even really seen what that is going to turn into, because a couple of days ago, I believe that was probably, I think, Friday or Saturday, there was mass coronal injections. Now, what I mean by that is major sun explosions, tornadoes on the sun surface, which obviously erupts, and then it goes out into the atmosphere. So it usually takes a day, I believe a day or two, for really to see the effects of that too. But these coronal injections, these massive coronal injections, are no joke. They're very concerning, because a lot of people know that this could really wipe out the grid, and that should be everyone's concern. And just the overall communications, it could actually take us right back to the Stone Age, truthfully. It really could. I mean, it could really just, do what it does, shut down the grid, depending on where you are, or just worldwide. Some other news that hasn't really been covered, it's kind of got overshadowed because of the Boston bombing, is that, as you know, that the Jodi Arias trial was going on prior to all the confusion around the Boston bombing. I mean, when I turned on the TV and I noticed, what was going on from the live video in the Boston bombing on the day of the marathon, I couldn't believe. I was like, what is going? I'm like, I can't believe this is happening again. I was just shocked. But prior to that, of course, there was a Jodi Arias trial, and I just thought, and I need to say this just because I think that's the right thing to do, is I don't watch it, only because I can't get caught up in something like that. Too much of my attention's on other parts of news, and honestly, I don't know how much time I would want to devote to it, but since it's become such a part of the frenzy in the topics, I just want to say this as far as how Jodi Arias has been portrayed as a domestic violence victim. I hope that they really do address this for the sake of all domestic violence victims, because it really does really put a really ugly scene in the mind's eyes of others. That somehow every domestic violence victim somehow hacks their boyfriend or, their intimate partner to death. So, really, she did a number on this guy. And to me, I don't know if domestic violence would really force a woman to do something like that. I don't know why they would tie that to domestic violence. Apparently she's supposed to be the victim, but it looks like, I mean, where's the confusion in that? You know, she's the victim, but he's dead. I don't get that. And unfortunately, a lot of domestic violence victims they're real victims, can never want to attach themselves to something as gruesome as this case with Jodi Arias. And I mean, with all due respect, all domestic violence victims are real true victims. I don't know how much I can say she's a victim or not. I just question that somehow maybe she uses the domestic violence as a way to get out of trouble. And I see it's very common. Just like a lot of people fake a lot of things. I just don't know how much truth I can find in that yet. I mean, unless she called a domestic violence shelter and had an ongoing relationship with a shelter or crisis center, I don't know how much I would put. I would try to take some of that out of context and say this: not all victims, murder to the degree that she did. Just with all due respect, I mean, not all victims would do something like that, and it just really puts a really ugly face on domestic violence, because the real victims out there do deserve and are entitled to have their story heard, you know. And let's just hope people are smart enough not to attach that to the topic of domestic violence altogether. Secondly, I think there was some other news that, Syria, and some of the international news that we haven't heard much from Assad. I have to tell you, we've been reporting it, and it's been pretty common knowledge that something strange has been going on with the Assad bodyguard in the case that was made throughout the news a couple weeks ago. Israel, I think J-Post was reporting some Israeli news that questionable things as far as Assad being assassinated. But what that actually turned into, again, the Boston bombing and then the explosion in Texas kind of wiped this stuff off the headlines for that time period. Immigration, some of these things are going on. I don't want to lose focus on some of the other things that are going on, but when it comes to international news, immigration, although it's a national topic, it is an international news. What we're inviting into this country is more than just immigrants. We're inviting all kinds of other problems, and that seems to not be a message that needs to get through. Although on the law books, it looks like the right thing to do, and I think that's what a lot of people are trying to convince a lot of the people throughout the country of the United States. They're convincing us that somehow this is good policy, when we know that it's not just the policy itself that's problematic. It's all the other problems we have invited into this country that we're being squeezed at both ends, no doubt. But all the other problems that it brings in, like, I could just sit here and number off a couple of things, like one, drunk driving accidents, and the increase of drunk driving and the fatalities just from foreign-born Mexicans. It's an outrageous. Rapes have jumped among the Hispanic population that are immigrants. So a lot of the crimes, drug crimes, a lot of those crimes that you see that have jumped in those areas, and then we're talking about the demographics. It's very important to realize that, you know, they don't want us to talk about that reality, that harsh reality. They just want to paint a good picture. You know, we're a bunch of do-gooders and we're trying to do the right thing and we're a nation of immigrants. Yeah, but, you know, there was also a certain requirement for people to come into the United States without having to go through a proper policy and proper procedures. I mean, it just makes the whole discussion irrelevant. And to think that we have representatives and senators that are going to back that, ignore the facts, the truth of what real immigration is. You know, we're just going to gloss over this and glaze over it. So it's a topic that certainly should not be ignored. Not by us, not by any of us. And then once we continually address this. Because once that happens, you know who's really going to be affected by this? I mean, although we might be, you know, if we're around still at that point, but it's going to be our kids and our grandkids. So this argument, we may not see the real effects immediately on a larger scale, but I think we will. I really do. I think we're going to feel this. And once you know that this is no longer, once they get pushed through the case of immigration, and if that's the case, there's no stopping what other policies are coming down the road. And you know what? We've already lost too much of those precious personal freedoms we enjoy. I don't know if we have the ability to lose any more, but gosh, you know, that's something we should all really, really understand, that this is a topic worth delving into more. Some other topics as far as immigration, and of course she heard some of the things on the national security regarding the Boston bombing, and some of the good outcomes that came from any of that. If there's anything good that comes out of all this, is that some people probably woke up through this, and I think that's worth noting. I think that most people saw how that news coverage was handled. We also got a sneak peek of what it would look like for a city to be shut down, or what martial law would look like, or a police state. Certainly gave us all a window into what happens. It's not the way we want to see America run, but I mean, in this case, that's what you saw, and that's what you get, you know. Some of those things are something worth discussing. I think there's a lot of other news captions and stuff at our page. You can find us at Pinterest.com, The Field Report, or at Facebook, The Field Report. We really, really appreciate you listening in for this short brief and debrief. And again, thank you for listening. Good night.